Hola, senors and senoritas, my special screen flakes. Yes, it is I still exist. Unfortunately, I am still here among the living. If you're wondering where I've been, well, I've been on one of my classic hiatuses, which roughly translates into me procrastinating, being unmotivated, unincentivized, and basically just doing fuck all. Now, in my idleness, right, randomly, I've noticed in my fuck allness, I've managed to procure 5 more subscribers. I now have 20 subscribers somehow, even though I did fuck all for almost a month. So I wonder if that's a YouTube trend or if that's a formula of sorts. Anyway, I'm digressing. This is going to be quite a long video, so what I want to do today is this is a fic I wanted to do quite a while back, but since I didn't have I wanted to do it in such a specific way, I wanted to make it spectacular. However, though, since I don't have the talent, skill, or ability, since I am a hack, now I'm just going to read this verbatim. So yes, you're going to hear me espouse this like an autistic retard. So essentially, this fic is essentially the first fic I was introduced to when I actually got into the fandom. So it has a special place in my heart. And we're going to refer to this fic as SAMantha. And poor SAMantha has no authorship. She has no author. So I'm going to do the best I can to pay homage, to respect her, and hopefully you'll enjoy it as much as I did, because this has kept me in a very good, a warm and healthy place. This has filled me with a lot of warmth and joy over the years. So anyway, let's begin the degeneracy of SAMantha. Big Macintosh surveyed the many apple trees that made up Sweet Apple Acres. It was nearly apple box season once again, and it looked as though they would be having a bumper harvest this year. He nodded, satisfied. His sister Applejack walked up beside him. "Oh, boy, howdy! I sure am glad you ain't injured this time, Big Macintosh," she said. "Why, there's even more apples on them trees than last year." "Eeyup," Big Macintosh replied, in his characteristic manner. "There's a lot of apples." Applejack was silent for a moment, enjoying the feel of the slight breeze against her blonde mane. "Say, I don't suppose you've seen Apple Bloom anywhere, have you? I've been looking for her all day, and she ain't nowhere to be found." Big Macintosh shook his head. "Sorry, sis, can't say I have. Darn, that silly filly's probably gone off somewhere with her friends. I just hope she ain't getting herself into any mischief, or else there'll be hay to pay." "Don't you go worrying yourself, Applejack," he replied. "I'm sure she's perfectly fine. But anyway, I need to go back to the barn. I gotta go press some apples for my home-brewed apple cider. I hope picked a few apples early especially, all nice and plump and ripe. And they ain't gonna press themselves." Applejack laughed. "You sure do love your cider, don't you? Just make sure Apple Bloom don't get her hooves on it again. We all know what happened last time." Big Macintosh chuckled along with his sister. "Yep." The large red pony trotted back to the barn and gently closed the door. He opened a large trap door with his mouth and went down the steps into an old disused apple cellar. Usually it was just filled with junk, scrap metal, old worn out ploughs, old ropes, and various other bits and bobs that outlived their usefulness. Big Macintosh often came down here when he wanted to get away from the world, to withdraw for a while, for some peace and quiet. Today was different, however. The old rope, at least, had found a new use, because in the cellar space were Apple Bloom and her fellow Cutie Mark Crusaders, Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo, bound and gagged, propped up against the wall. 3 pairs of scared, round eyes looked up at Big Macintosh as he approached. "Now then, you 3 fillies," he said as placid as ever, "y'all need to learn a lesson. You need to learn not to mess around with Big Macintosh. All I want is some peace and quiet," he said, looking directly at Apple Bloom. The little red-haired filly cowered under his gaze. "All I want is a quiet life, without all y'all Cutie Mark Crusaders running around the place making with the noise. When I'm finished with y'all, there's going to be no noise from you ever again." As Big Macintosh approached, Scootaloo flapped her wings, struggling to get off the ground. Big Macintosh laughed and grabbed one of her wings. He twisted, at first slow, watching the pain visibly grow in her eyes, but then tore hard, smiling slightly when he heard the snap and the muffled whimper that came from Scootaloo. He then threw her to the ground. "Your wings are useless, you silly filly," he said pleasantly. He then went to a toolbox and took out a rusty knife with a jagged blade and dropped it in front of the 3 fillies. I'm going to take those gags off now, he said. The first one of you to scream gets their tongue cut out. He took off Sweetie Belle's gag first. She looked up at him with terror, but managed to stay quiet. Next was Scootaloo. She let out a strangled whine and was breathing heavily, still in horrendous pain from her broken wing, but managed to resist the temptation. Finally, he removed the gag from his sister, Apple Bloom. She stared at him with large round eyes, filled with fear and incomprehension. This was Big Macintosh, after all, her big brother, and the gentlest of souls. Wasn't he? Surely this was just a horrible joke, but she had seen what he had done to Scootaloo's wing, and it was definitely no joke. She took a deep breath. Applejack! Big Macintosh shoved his hoof in Apple Bloom's mouth, silencing her scream. He sighed and shook his head. I told you not to scream, Apple Bloom. You should listen to your big brother. I'll scream and scream again, and Applejack will hear, and Apple Bloom said falteringly. You know, I kind of hope you do. After all, I still ain't forgiven Applejack for that injury she gave me last Applebuck season. If you want Applejack to join y'all down here, scream away. I, for one, would welcome her company. But now, to business. Big Macintosh picked up the knife and loomed over the cowering Apple Bloom. He pinned her down with a powerful hoof and stuck the knife into Apple Bloom's mouth. Sweetie Belle vomited out the sight, the thick yellow chunks and acidic-smelling liquid splattering heavily on the floor. Scootaloo managed not to be sick, but rather gasped and sobbed and choked with panic. Big Macintosh forced open Apple Bloom's mouth and with some effort cut out her tongue. Apple Bloom tried to scream, but her mouth was too full of blood, so it was more of a muted gurgle. After a short while she collapsed, tears streaming from her eyes, falling unconscious from the shock and the pain. Big Macintosh then took the tongue and rolled it in the puddle of putrid vomit on the floor. He smiled at Scootaloo. You hungry? Scootaloo shook her head vigorously and cast him a defiant glare. If Rainbow Dash was here, she would kick the crap out of you maniac! Big Macintosh shrugged. Well, she ain't. And anyway, I wouldn't be so sure about that. Rainbow Dash ain't as tough as she likes to make out. He shoved the vomit-covered tongue into Scootaloo's mouth and used his hoof to clamp her mouth shut. Don't you go trying to spit it out now, he said calmly, with a little laugh, as the filly struggled and squirmed. Didn't your mother ever tell you how important it is to chew your food? Scootaloo closed her eyes and flapped her one good wing desperately, eventually swallowing Apple Bloom's tongue. Big Macintosh still holding the riding Scootaloo down with his strong hooves, then mounted the orange filly and slid his penis into her tight Virgin pussy, raping her for several minutes, while Sweetie Belle watched, trembling with revulsion. Apple Bloom was still out cold, blood pouring from her torn-up mouth. Cutie Mark Crusaders rape victims, Big Macintosh said, with tender mockery, as he fucked Scootaloo, followed by a gentle chuckle. Guess you'll find your purpose in life. Your special talent is getting raped. Eeyup! Eventually he withdrew from Scootaloo and gripped her head tight and repeatedly punched her hard with a hoof in the face, causing her nose to shatter and spurt with blood. He scooped up some of the blood and some of Sweetie Belle's vomit with his tongue and held it in his mouth so it mixed with his saliva, and then brought his mouth close to Scootaloo's and spat the rank mixture into her mouth. He clamped his hoof over her mouth and held her nose until she gagged, and eventually had no choice but to swallow. As Scootaloo retched and spat and cried, he turned to Sweetie Belle. He grabbed her easily as she was too shocked and traumatized to respond, and with apparent amusement, he rammed her horn up Scootaloo's ass. The horn was too big and hard, so the skin around Scootaloo's ass ripped, and blood and fecal matter first trickled and then poured profusely down onto Sweetie Belle's face, as well as urine as Scootaloo pissed herself. Y'all keep doing that, Sweetie Belle, he said. The unicorn carried on pushing her horn up Scootaloo's anus. Slowly but surely, her normally well-groomed pink and purple mane was now stained a reddish-brown, glistening with the wetness of the piss and blood. If you stop, I'll come over there and get creative. I may seem a bit dense, but I'm actually quite a creative stallion, Big Macintosh said, with a wink. Eeyup! He went to Apple Bloom and penetrated his little sister's unconscious body with his hard cock. While he violated her, he procured another knife, this one sharp and shiny, and sliced open her flank, causing her glistening intestines to flop out wetly onto the floor. He glanced over and was pleased to see that Sweetie Belle was still using her horn to anally penetrate Scootaloo, and her face was now completely covered in blood and feces and urine. He turned his attention back to Apple Bloom and scooped up her crimson entrails and wrapped them around her neck, still fucking the filly with his front hooves. He pulled and pulled until it was wrapped so tightly around Apple Bloom's neck that it broke her windpipe. She was now surely dead, but Big Macintosh continued fucking her furiously until her body began to lose form and collapse into a quivering amorphous mass of fur and blood and flesh. The perineum had fallen away, leaving a single red and raw gaping void. He carried on until he was fucking nothing but a single swollen and bloody orifice, and then discarded his baby sister's carcass as though it were nothing more than a mere rotten apple core. He then took the knife and grabbed Sweetie Belle and tossed her aside. He forced himself into Scootaloo's ruined anus and then took the knife and cut from her ass in a sweeping motion up to her belly, and all her innards fell out. He then grabbed her head, twisted and tore it clean off, using his immense strength, and fucked it in the mouth and then tossed it aside. He then had sex with her headless body, both in the vagina and the ass, until he got bored. Sweetie Belle was the last remaining Cutie Mark Crusader. She was herself barely conscious, overcome with the nauseous stench of blood, shit and piss that covered her horn and her face. Big Macintosh pinned Sweetie Belle down with his hoof and plunged the knife into her green eye and twisted, causing vitreous fluid to drip out onto the handle. At that, Sweetie Belle let out a throaty whine and involuntarily emptied her bowels, and the aroma of fresh urine and feces filled the apple cellar once again. He withdrew the knife and did the same to the other eye, each time holding her tight and sticking his hoof in her mouth to silence her agonized screams. He licked the vitreous fluid that had leaked onto the knife, and then methodically began cutting and hacking at her front left hoof using the rusty knife. The knife was quite blunt, so it took a Herculean effort to get through the skin, bone and cartilage, but eventually the bone splintered and the leg came off. He did the same to the other leg until all four were amputated and nothing remained but bloody stumps, with slimy white ligament and broken bone shards hanging out. At some point, Sweetie Belle had passed out, the overwhelming pain too much for her to bear. He then used the knife to gouge out her left eye and jammed his penis into her eye socket, penetrating repeatedly deep into her brain, enjoying how tight her skull felt around his hot shaft and how warm and squishy the brain matter felt against the tip of his throbbing penis. As he did, he twisted Sweetie Belle's neck. After he had finished skull-fucking her, he cracked open her skull with a swift stamp of a hoof and bent down and ate some of the exposed brain, taking care to spit out a few fragments of bone skull that had been mixed in as he chewed. It was warm and slimy and tough, and stuck to the back of his throat. He swallowed and then raped Sweetie Belle in the ass until it tore open and his gorged penis was smeared with what little fecal matter remained in her rectum. He took one of Sweetie Belle's detached legs and shoved it inside her ass, and then fucked Apple Bloom and Scootaloo's bodies the same way, forcing the amputated limb in, hoof first, as far as it could go. He thought how strange it was that the still lumps of torn flesh that he was fucking with Sweetie Belle's leg had been so vibrant and alive such a short time ago. But now all three were dead. And he finished by spurting his voluminous load into Apple Bloom's destroyed backside. He watched with satisfaction as the semen and blood and shit mixed together, forming a foamy maroon pool. He bent down and greedily lapped up some of it with his tongue, pressing his tongue deep, so deep, into her anal cavity, so as not to miss any, letting some dribble down his chin. It tasted foul, of course, a rancid, tangy slime that burned his throat, but it felt so satisfying. He swallowed the filthy goo and wiped his mouth with a hoof. It was done. Big Macintosh would finally get his peace and quiet. "Big Macintosh, you down there?" It was Applejack. He looked at the disfigured corpses of the three fillies, all now barely recognizable as the oh-so-sweet Cutie Mark Crusaders, and realized he felt strangely unsatisfied. It had all been a bit too quick and easy. Now Applejack, that would be a challenge. She was Ponyville's best athlete, after all. She even had the prize Ponyville trophy to prove it. And of course, he still hadn't forgiven her for that injury. He felt his penis stiffen once again in anticipation. "Hey, Big Mac! I said, are you down there?" came Applejack's lilting voice, this time more insistent. Big Macintosh replied serenely, "I sure am, sis. Hey, come down here a minute." I've got something to show you. Sure thing, what is it? It's a surprise. Oh boy, I sure do love surprises. Something real nice, I bet. Something real nice? Big Macintosh looked at the mangled, mutilated remains of the Cutie Mark Crusaders, and his lips curled into a thin smile. Eeyup! Well, wasn't that enchanting and enticing and just probably spellbinding and beautiful? And I would just like to finish with saying, well, this is what happens when nobody recommends me fics. So if you're not going to recommend me fics, right, this is what's to be expected. I mean, that, or you could just unsubscribe. I could have a mass exodus. I do realize that I could have a mass exodus here, which, oh well. So yeah. So what I would recommend is, if you want more fics like this, don't say anything. Just let me go off on my own autonomy, under my own volition, and then of course you already know what will happen. So yeah. So just putting that out there. You want me to read your crazy shit, then I'll do that. If not, then I'll just do my own thing. So cool, and thanks for 20 subscribers, even though I haven't earned it, but thanks anyway. Love you guys. Eeyup!